It was a quiet Sunday evening in Austin, the kind that used to feel safe. The roast chicken had just come out of the oven, the smell of garlic butter filling the kitchen I had built with my late husband 30 years ago. My son Andrew was running late as always, but his wife Clara was right on time carrying a bottle of wine she probably couldn't pronounce. She looked radiant in that effortless way people do when they're used to being admired. She set the bottle down, leaned toward me, and said, "Old age has its perks, Mom." I looked up from the table a little startled, unsure if I heard her right. The words hung there, coded in that sugary tone she always used when there was something behind it. The light from the chandelier caught on her new diamond ring, one I knew Andrew couldn't afford. He had told me just a week ago they were saving for a car repair. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text alert from the bank glowed $5,000 withdrawal confirmed. My hand trembled not from shock, but from a kind of slow, deep clarity. Clara smiled, poured herself wine, and said, "Oh, I handled your bills today, too. Don't worry. You shouldn't stress over little things anymore." I remembered my husband's voice as if he were in the room. "Don't ever let charm handle your checkbook." I smiled back at her. It wasn't the kind of smile you give out of warmth. It was the kind you wear when you need to hide the tremor beneath your ribs. "Well," I said softly, tapping the spoon against my glass, "some perks come with memory, too." Her smile faltered just a hair like a string pulled too tight. I watched her adjust her ring. People lie with their eyes, but guilt lives in the hands. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the slow ticking of the kitchen clock. I wanted to believe there was some misunderstanding, but the smell of deceit was sharper than garlic that night. When Andrew walked in minutes later, cheerful and oblivious, I served him dinner, each movement deliberate, every plate a stage prop, in a play I hadn't agreed to act in. Clara was animated talking about a spa retreat she was planning for the ladies. I knew exactly where that retreat money had come from. I didn't speak. I just listened, every word carving itself into my mind like numbers on a ledger. She praised herself for helping Mom with finances. She said it with pride, as though generosity could be measured by how well you spent someone else's savings. My fork rested halfway between the plate and my mouth. I saw it then, the invisible pattern. Only accountants notice the withdrawals every 30 days, the timing of her compliments, the sudden generosity in small, showy gestures. It wasn't kindness, it was cover. I had seen it before in corporate audits decades ago. Fraud dressed as helpfulness, theft hidden inside routine. When the meal ended, I excused myself, washed the dishes, slowly watching the soap bubble against the light. I thought about calling the bank right then, but something in me refused the impulse. You don't confront a thief when they still believe you're blind. You wait, you listen, you let them build the story that will bury them. I looked at Clara's empty wine glass, the faint imprint of her lipstick, and thought, this is how betrayal looks when it pretends to be affection. I could hear them laughing in the living room, the sound hollow and distant. I dried my hands, sat down at my desk, and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook I hadn't touched since retiring. On the first page, I wrote in neat block letters, Justice Journal. Below it, a single line. May 15th. Clara withdrew $5,000. Old age apparently has its perks. The ink spread slightly into the paper fibers, permanent, undeniable. I closed the notebook and exhaled. My pulse was steady. The fear had burned off, leaving something colder, cleaner. In that stillness, I made a quiet promise to myself. No shouting, no confrontation, just truth documented. I glanced toward the living room where Clara's laughter rose again, that perfect high-pitched sound people mistake for innocence. I let it echo for a moment before whispering to the empty room, "You'll laugh again, Clara, but next time it'll be on record. Have you ever smiled at someone who just stole from you or pretended not to see just to learn how far they'd go?" Monday morning arrived with a stillness that felt rehearsed. The Texas light came through the curtains in careful streaks, landing on the ledger I had left on the dining table the night before. I had not slept well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that text message, the $5,000 withdrawal, blinking behind my eyelids like a taunt. By 9, I had dressed in my gray cardigan, pressed slacks, and comfortable shoes. Habit made me neat even when my mind wasn't. The Burnett Road branch of the bank was only 15 minutes away. I had driven there for decades, back when my husband was alive, back when every deposit meant something hopeful. Now I parked in the same spot, turned off the engine, and sat for a long breath before walking in. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and printer ink. A young teller with smooth hair and kind eyes smiled as I approached. Her name tag read Jenna. She looked at me the way young people sometimes do, with polite patience. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you today?" I handed her my ID and said evenly, "I need to review my account activity. Something doesn't look right." She typed quickly, nails clicking on the keys. "Of course. Let's take a look." Her expression shifted as she scanned the screen, that subtle tightening around the mouth I had seen 1,000 times during audits. Something on that monitor was not right. "Did you authorize your daughter-in-law, Clara Bennett Pratt, as an additional user?" she asked. My breath caught. "What did you just say?" Jenna turned the screen slightly toward me. "She's listed here as an authorized user on your main checking account. The authorization form was uploaded last month with your signature." I frowned. "That's impossible. I don't even own a scanner." Jenna's cheeks colored. "It looks official, but if you didn't approve this, we can start a dispute." She printed the form. I leaned forward. The signature looked like mine, but the loops were too sharp, the spacing unnatural. Years of bookkeeping had trained my eyes to see what others missed. It was copied, probably traced from an old check. The document font was mismatched, one line bold, the other faint. Amateur work yet enough to pass casual scrutiny. "Would you like to close the account?" Mrs. Pratt Jenna asked gently. "Not yet," I said. "Could you print the last 6 statements instead?" She nodded, her printer humming. I thanked her and left with a folder of papers that suddenly felt heavier than their weight. Outside, the air pressed warm and humid against my face. I drove home slower than usual, the rhythm of the turn signals matching the pulse in my wrist. At home, I laid the statements across the kitchen table. The pattern was clean, almost artistic. Every 30 days exactly on the 15th, a withdrawal of $5,000. The memo line read, "House maintenance medical support gift shared expenses, each one polite civilized theft." I opened my laptop, that old silver one with the loose hinge, and logged in. There it was again, 6 transfers in 6 months. $30,000 gone. My husband and I had saved that for emergencies, not for jewelry and spa retreats. The thought burned slow and deep. I stood up, paced once, then twice before sitting again. The old instincts came alive. In accounting, patterns never lie. I took out my notebook and wrote 6 withdrawals, all round numbers, no receipts. I circled the line 3 times. My mind started building scenarios, timelines, motives. Clara must have done this after earning Andrew's full trust with those constant talks about helping Mom with her online banking. He was busy with work. He wouldn't notice. She knew exactly when he was away. My jaw tightened. A breeze moved through the curtains, carrying the faint scent of lavender from the garden. I thought of Clara laughing at dinner at her practiced gentleness, her false compliments. I thought of the ring again, the one that didn't belong. It was never about the money itself. It was about the ease, the entitlement. I could almost hear her voice saying, "It's fine, Mom, I've got this." People say betrayal feels like a wound, but it feels more like a counting error. Tiny, precise, hidden, until the balance is too far gone. I spent the next hour verifying dates, matching them to Andrew's business trips. Every withdrawal aligned with his absence. Clara was methodical, confident that I would never question her help. The printer whirred as I made copies of the statements, my old habits returning like muscle memory. When I looked up, the sunlight had shifted, casting long slats of shadow across the floor. The clock read noon. I hadn't eaten breakfast. I sat back, letting the stillness expand. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower started a sound that made everything feel ordinary again. But nothing about this was ordinary. $30,000 missing from a widow's account is not oversight. It is intention. The phone rang, startling me. It was Andrew calling between meetings. "Hey, Mom, everything good?" he asked. "Fine," I said evenly, "just balancing a few numbers." He laughed, distracted. "You never stop working. Clara said she sorted your bills." Hope that helped. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. It helped clarify things. He didn't notice the edge in my tone. We hung up. I stood by the window for a long moment, watching the neighborhood move. Across the street, my neighbor Dorothy was watering her roses. She spotted me and waved. "That young one drives that fancy Lexus now, huh?" she called. I forced a polite nod. My eyes followed the car parked in Clara's driveway, polished new, the kind of shine money can't hide. Inside the folder of bank statements sat open on the table, each page, a confession written in numbers. The hum of the refrigerator filled the room like background music to a decision forming in silence. The anger was there, steady but controlled. I could almost hear my husband's calm voice again. Facts first, feelings later. I picked up a pen, drew a neat line under the last transaction, and wrote one word beside it, motive. Then beneath that, another, proof. Would you forgive your child's spouse for $30,000? At what point does helping become stealing? The questions hung in the air unanswered, like the faint ticking of the kitchen clock, marking the moment when trust officially ran out. The next Sunday began like any other, the church bells of St. Mary's, echoing through the warm Austin air. I stayed home that morning, sorting papers in my study, still tracing every missing dollar. Around noon, my neighbor Dorothy called. "Eleanor, you should see this," she said. "Clara's on the church women's group broadcast." I opened my laptop, and there she was, framed by the soft lighting of the parish hall, her hair perfectly done, that gentle smile rehearsed to perfection. The headline at the bottom read, "Young Volunteer of the Month." I watched her fold her hands like a saint. "I've been helping my mother-in-law with her finances," she said sweetly. "She's getting older and sometimes she forgets things, so I just make sure her bills are handled and her account is safe." The interviewer nodded approvingly. "That's very thoughtful, dear. Not everyone would take such responsibility." Clara smiled again, eyes shimmering with false humility. "Family is everything," she said. I froze, feeling my pulse climb. The chat below the live video filled with comments. "What a blessing she is. We need more daughters-in-law like her. Such a sweet soul." I shut the laptop before I threw it. My reflection lingered in the black screen, the kind of stillness that comes after insult. "Forgetful," she said. She told a room full of people I was forgetful. My mind ran through 40 years of perfect records tax seasons, balanced to the cent clients who trusted me more than their own families. Forgetful. I turned to the shelf and pulled out one of my old ledgers. The ink had faded, but the numbers were still clean, straight lines of memory and precision. I ran my fingers over the paper, grounding myself in the one thing she could not rewrite: truth. Later that afternoon, I drove to the H-E-B on 35th Street. Grocery shopping had always been my ritual, a quiet task that made me feel in control. The aisles smelled of coffee and detergent. When I reached the checkout, the young cashier recognized me. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Pratt," she chirped. "Did your daughter-in-law pay for your groceries again? She's such a saint." The words landed heavier than they should have. I forced a thin smile and said nothing. The receipt printed curling from the machine. I took it and looked down. There it was, my own name printed neatly, E. Pratt. Visa. 32. My card. My money. The cashier continued bagging the groceries, humming along to the store's soft music. I slipped the receipt into my purse like evidence. On the way out, I saw a couple from church waving at me. "Eleanor," the woman said, "Clara's doing so much for you, bless her heart." I smiled again, my face an unbroken mask. "Yes," I said, "she certainly is." In the parking lot, I sat inside my car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. It wasn't the theft that hurt most. It was the way she painted me as fragile, incompetent a charity project for her public image. Pride has its own pulse. It beats louder than fear. When I got home, the house was empty. The air conditioner hummed softly. I laid the grocery bags on the counter and looked at the framed photo of Andrew and Clara on their wedding day. I remembered how kind she had seemed back then, nervous but eager to belong. She had asked me for my lasagna recipe. She had called me Mom. I had believed her. I walked to my desk, opened the Justice Journal, and added a new line. June 2nd, Clara featured on St. Mary's broadcast. Claims I'm forgetful. Spent $187 on groceries using my card. The letters came out neat, steady. I paused before writing the last sentence. Saints do not steal. As I wrote, the faint click of the front door opening broke the silence. Clara's voice floated down the hallway, bright and airy. Mom, we stopped by for a minute. Andrew's got something to show you. I closed the notebook calmly and turned to greet them. Andrew held a small box, the kind that jewelry stores use for subtle extravagance. Look what Clara surprised me with, he said, opening it to reveal a new watch. She said it's for all the overtime I've been putting in. The watch shimmered in the light. Clara leaned against the doorframe, smiling. You deserve it, she said. You work so hard. I nodded slowly, my eyes on her manicured hands. I recognized the logo on the jewelry bag tucked into her purse. It was the same store that sold the ring from the dinner night. Beautiful, I said. Hard work should be rewarded. My voice was even neutral, but Andrew glanced at me as if trying to read something hidden. Clara linked her arm through his. We're heading to dinner with friends, she said. Just wanted to stop by. She looked around the house, eyes scanning the furniture, the framed photos, the curtains she had once suggested I replace. Still cozy as ever, she said lightly. They left a minute later. I watched them walk down the path, her heels clicking against the brick I had scrubbed every week for decades. The sound followed them like punctuation. I stayed by the window until their car disappeared down the street. The sun dipped lower, throwing long shadows through the blinds. My reflection merged with the glass, older but unbroken. Would you correct them, those people who praise the thief, or let them keep believing the story she wrote? How does it feel when your dignity is stolen in public, not by force but by charm? I thought of the video again, her face radiant, her words soft. I thought of all the comments underneath. Sweet soul, loving daughter, selfless woman. I whispered to the empty room. Sweet souls don't forge signatures. Then I walked to my desk and underlined the word proof 3 times. Outside, the street was quiet except for a single car engine fading into the distance. I looked once more at the notebook and whispered, perfection never lasts when numbers start to add up. I opened the Justice Journal at dawn while the house was still holding its breath. The paper smelled faintly of dust and ink and old decisions. I dated the page with a careful hand and began listing every withdrawal in clean columns, the way I used to do in the conference room at Andrews and Pierce Associates when a client swore their balances were honest. Muscle memory guided the pen. Date amount, memo line, cross-reference note. My mind settled into the steady rhythm that had carried me through 40 tax seasons, through audits and reconciliations, and the long, quiet hours when numbers told stories people were afraid to say out loud. I poured coffee and read the bank statements again, eyes tracing the pattern I already knew. The 15th of each month, 5,000, memos that sounded like courtesy, house maintenance, medical support, shared expenses. It was the politest theft I had ever seen. I highlighted each memo, wrote a short description beside it, then opened my laptop and downloaded the PDFs, just in case someone decided to tidy the records later. A breeze drifted through the kitchen screen, carrying the faint smell of cut grass. It made me think of the office air on April mornings, long ago, when the first wave of tax returns would land on my desk and the partners would nod, as if to say, we trust you with the truth. The phone rang at 8:30. The name on the screen made me smile in spite of the sourness in my stomach. Harold Bennett. We had shared a cubicle wall for a decade, passing staplers and dry jokes and half of our professional lives. I answered, and he skipped the small talk. "Eleanor, has anyone filed a return in your name this year?" The question dropped into the room like a weight. I sat down at the table. "Not that I know of. Why?" He cleared his throat in that precise way I remembered a little, like he was about to read a ledger. "I have a friend at a prep office. They flagged a direct deposit refund for a return that used your Social Security number. It was not large, about $2,700. It hit an account that is not yours." My hand tightened on the edge of the table. "Do you have the bank-ending digits?" He read them. I wrote them. I stared at the numbers. They were not mine. Harold paused, then said what we were both thinking. "Who has your documents?" "Your daughter-in-law." I kept my voice level. "She has touched too much already." He exhaled. "Meet me at Summer Moon Coffee at 2. We will talk in person. Bring your statements. Bring your calm." I laughed without humor. I have more calm than she thinks. After the call, I stood very still, letting the new fact find its place in the pattern. Theft from checking is one thing. Filing a return and taking a refund is a line you do not cross without believing the target will never fight back. I looked at the Justice Journal and added a new entry. Tax refund $2,700 wrong account. Then I opened my phone and recorded a voice memo to myself with the date and time and details, because memories are sharp, but juries like recordings. Before noon, I called the bank on speaker and asked for confirmation that Clara Bennett Pratt was listed as an authorized user. The agent read the note on my account and confirmed the upload month. I asked her to email a copy of the policy for adding users and ended the call. Another voice memo. Another page in the journal. "Would you act dumb to catch a liar?" The question hung in the kitchen, steady and clean. People underestimate you when you measure your words, when you keep your posture, when you let silence finish your sentences. I had built a career on that discipline. By 2, I was sitting across from Harold in a corner of Summer Moon, where the light fell soft on the wood table. He looked exactly like the last day I saw him at the firm, only kinder around the eyes. He slid a manila folder toward me. I recognized the layout of the transcript summary at once. He tapped a line with a blunt finger. "This is the routing of the refund. It maps to an account that lists your name in the memo description, but the owner on file is not you." He met my eyes. That is a tactic I have seen when people open a side account and label it as a caretaking fund. I nodded. Caretaking is a nice word for siphoning. He folded his hands. "Let her think you are slow. That is your biggest asset right now. If she believes you are confused, she will keep pushing. When she pushes, she will trip." I sipped my coffee and let the warmth settle my hands. "I am not slow," I said. "I am patient." He smiled. "I know. That is why we are here." We agreed on a plan. I would not confront her. I would collect. I would invite her to handle a simple set of payments and watch the path her hands chose. He would help me prepare a clean file with tabs and dates and screenshots. We would avoid drama and build a body of evidence you could set on a judge's desk without a speech. We sat a long time, 2 old accountants mapping a quiet war. When we parted, he pressed the folder into my hands. "Call me if she moves money again. And remember, do not warn her." The drive home felt shorter, as if the street had straightened for me. The sun leaned west and the heat softened. Back in the kitchen, I spread my materials across the table and created a system any junior analyst could follow. Left pile printed statements, center pile receipts from the last 3 months, right pile notes of every conversation with date and time. I opened the laptop and saved every relevant email to a local folder titled Records. I exported the bank transaction history to a spreadsheet and added columns for note code and verification status. I made a simple key in the margin: HM for house maintenance, MS for medical support, GX for gifts, SE for shared expenses. Then I color-coded the withdrawals and matched them to my calendar entries. On May 15th, I had a medical appointment in the morning. On June 15th, I was home all day. On April 15th, Andrew had flown to Dallas before sunrise. The pattern tightened. In the late afternoon, I called the bank again and asked a different agent to confirm the exact time of each transfer. She read them in a calm voice one by one. I thanked her, asked for a copy of the transaction details in PDF, and saved the file the moment it arrived. Another voice memo. Another line in the journal. I printed the PDFs and wrote in the margins. Time device IP if listed. When I looked up, the room had shifted to that late-day color that makes everything honest. The refrigerator hummed. A single car passed outside. I felt the steadiness that only comes when confusion has been replaced by a plan. The phone buzzed with a new message from the church women's group on the neighborhood page. A photo of Clara at a volunteer table smiling behind a stack of donation envelopes. The caption read, "She keeps our community together." I stared at the image until my eyes watered, not from sadness, but from the bright pressure of anger held in place. They say wisdom comes with age. Do you believe it still counts today? I whispered yes to the quiet house. Then I turned back to the work. I scanned my driver's license and social security card into an encrypted folder for my own record in case I needed to prove what should never have been questioned. I listed every person who had praised her in public so I could later offer them the truth without rancor. I watched a short tutorial on my phone for saving voicemails as audio files. I labeled each MP3 with date and purpose. No drama, only order. At dusk, I gathered everything into a binder with dividers. The spine took a written label in my neat accountant hand. Clara Draft 1. I held the binder for a long breath, feeling its weight. It was not vengeance I was building. It was a record. It was the kind of story numbers tell when no one is allowed to interrupt. The morning sun spilled across the porch like warm silk lighting the lavender bushes that lined the path. The air smelled faintly of lemon soap and new grass, the kind of scent that used to mean peace. I set 2 porcelain cups on the wicker table and poured tea, the steam curling gently between us. Clara arrived exactly at 9, right on schedule, her voice bright as wind chimes. "You're always up early, Mom," she said, sliding her sunglasses to the top of her head. I smiled and gestured to the chair across from me. "You're always so busy, dear. Sit for a moment." She laughed softly and sat down, tapping at her phone without looking up. The screen lit, and for a second before it dimmed, I saw the notification flash, "Payment received 1200 spa retreat." I kept my tone light, planning something special. She looked up, feigning surprise. "Oh, just a corporate wellness retreat. Work stress, you know." Her voice was smooth, confident. The kind of practiced calm people use when they think they are untouchable. I stirred my tea slowly, watching the swirl of milk fade into gold. "Corporate wellness," I repeated. "How lovely." I let a small pause stretch between us before adding, "You're still using my credit card for those errands, right?" She blinked once, her lashes fluttering like wings. Then she smiled. "Oh, it's all automatic, Mom. Old age has its perks." The words fell the same way they had that night at dinner light, but sharp-coated in sugar and malice. She reached for her tea and crossed her legs, the diamonds on her ankle bracelet catching the sun. I looked down at the phone she had set on the table, its screen still dimly glowing. My name was listed under the transaction note, E. Pratt, corporate wellness payment. The evidence I needed had walked right up my driveway and set itself beside the sugar bowl. "I see," I said quietly. "Automation can be convenient." She nodded eagerly, missing the shift in my voice. "Exactly. You shouldn't have to worry about small stuff. That's what family's for." I let the silence breathe for a moment, then asked, "Does Andrew know about the retreat?" Her expression flickered, the faintest crack. "He will. It's a surprise for him, too." She sipped her tea too quickly, wincing at the heat. I watched the tremor in her hand as she set the cup down. "You're very thoughtful," I said. "Always have been." She smiled again, that bright, polished smile she used in every photo, but I noticed the foundation around her nose had started to crease. People always reveal themselves when they think they're being admired. The longer she spoke about her plans, the clearer her pattern became. A little lie wrapped around a compliment, a transaction hidden inside kindness. "You should come to the next church gathering," she said. "Everyone misses you. They've been asking how you're doing." I tilted my head. "Oh, I'm sure they have. You've been such a good spokesperson for me lately." She laughed, not hearing the edge. I leaned back, letting the lavender-scented air settle between us. My tea had gone cold, but I didn't mind. Every word she said now was proof in motion. She started talking about spa treatments, about how self-care was important at her age, too. I nodded, pretending interest, though inside my mind I was already adding a new page to the Justice Journal. Payment received 1,200 spa retreat corporate wellness account, unauthorized. As she continued talking, I imagined Harold sitting in his office sorting evidence with his steady hands. I thought of how he had told me to let her think I was slow. He would have smiled to see how easily she confirmed her own theft. Sometimes all it takes is tea patience and a liar who thinks you are harmless. The neighbor's sprinkler clicked on a rhythmic hiss that filled the silence between Clara's sentences. She looked out toward the garden and said, "You've kept the place so beautiful. I hope Andrew and I can make ours half as nice someday." I smiled, though my eyes didn't soften. "It takes time," I said, "and honesty." She didn't flinch, but her fingers tapped once on the phone screen, a nervous tick. She probably didn't even know she had. I stood and gathered the cups. "Would you like more tea?" She shook her head quickly. "No, thank you. I have to run. The retreat starts early tomorrow." She rose from the chair, smoothed her dress, and picked up her phone. For a second, she looked at me, searching for something in my face. Maybe she felt the current shift beneath the still water. "You okay, Mom?" she asked softly. "You seem distant lately." I gave her a smile that could have passed for tender. "Just thoughtful," I said. "Sometimes I think too much about numbers." She laughed as if I'd told a harmless joke, waved, and walked down the steps, her heels clicking neatly on the path. I watched her leave, sunlight glinting off the car door as she drove away. The sound of the engine faded, leaving only the low hum of bees in the lavender. I stood there for a while, holding the empty cups, my reflection ghosted in the window pane. Would you confront her, or would you wait for proof? Sometimes silence is louder than anger. I turned back to the kitchen and opened the Justice Journal. My handwriting was steady as I wrote the new entry. June 29th. Clara used my credit card for a spa retreat. Corporate account labeled Wellness, claimed automation. Then I added one more line beneath it. When she smiled, I saw fear hiding behind foundation. I closed the notebook and placed it in the drawer. Outside, the sunlight moved across the porch floor like a slow clock hand marking time until the day she would realize the garden had been her test and she had failed it completely. The next morning, I called Harold and told him the garden test had given me exactly what we needed. He arrived just after noon with a small canvas bag and a quiet smile. We worked in the study with the blinds half closed, so the room felt like a calm harbor. He laid out a tiny camera no bigger than a shirt button and a thumb-sized recorder that could live behind a picture frame. He spoke in the same steady tone he used when teaching junior clerks to reconcile bank feeds. Nothing flashy, nothing illegal. We record only what happens in your home with your device. He fixed the camera to the spine of a book on the shelf across from my desk and angled it toward the chair where Clara preferred to sit. He taped the recorder inside the frame that held my wedding photo, the one with sunlight caught in my husband's tie. When he stepped back, the room looked unchanged. It felt like a ledger line drawn invisible but indelible. His instructions were simple. Invite her over to help reconcile accounts. Say you cannot remember where to click. Hand her the laptop and a stack of envelopes so her hands occupy the picture. Then keep your voice warm and slow so she believes you are grateful. We practiced once. I poured tea. He played Clara. I asked for help in the same even voice I would use to request a file. When we finished, he packed the canvas bag and looked at me as if he could see the ache beneath my calm. "You know what this is," he said softly. "It is not a trap. It is a mirror." After he left, I set the stage as if preparing for company. The desk was neatly arrayed. On the right, a folder labeled Household. In the center, my old laptop lid closed, so Clara would be the one to open it. On the left, a thin printed document titled Tax Payment Draft with a clean government logo at the top and a due date bolded near the bottom. The draft was harmless. It could not actually pay anything. It was designed to invite a login and a move of money that did not belong to her. I texted Clara in the early afternoon. "Could you stop by to help me reconcile a few statements?" She replied within minutes. "Of course, Mom, on my way after 3. At 3:15, the doorbell rang and the study took a slow breath. I met her in the entry, hugged her lightly, and led her down the hall. The camera watched from the shelf. The recorder listened from the frame. I poured tea into the same porcelain cups we had used on the porch. She sat with a cheerful sigh and opened the laptop without being asked. That is the gift thieves offer. They show you their appetite. I leaned close enough to make her feel needed. "I cannot remember where to find the tax portal," I said. "This draft says I should confirm a payment." She glanced at the printed page and smiled. "Let me take care of it." She logged in with a speed that did not match the story she liked to tell about helping me, because I was forgetful. Her fingers moved with certainty through the bookmarks, then to the bank tab, then to a folder of saved passwords that had not existed a month ago. My jaw wanted to clench. I kept it still. She downloaded the tax payment draft and clicked next to a field that said Review Pending, then paused, then pivoted to my checking account with a casualness that made my chest ache. I stood to refresh the tea so the camera could see the screen full on. While I was at the tray, she moved 2 windows and opened a transfer panel. She entered an amount of $2,500 and selected an account whose nickname included my surname. The routing that Harold had traced hummed at the edge of my memory. She typed a short note in the memo field. Tax hold. The irony held so neat it could have been printed. Would you feel pity or satisfaction? The question rose and fell like breath. I looked at her hands as she pressed confirm. There was a ring of lotion on one knuckle where the diamond rubbed. She did not look at me. She looked at the machine, then at her phone, where a new alert chimed. She muted it with a quick flick and turned back to the laptop, closing the transfer window as if tidying a napkin. I set her tea within reach. "Thank you, dear," I said, and my voice did not shake. She lifted the cup, sipped, then tapped the screen. All set. These things are easier when I handle them. I nodded. Justice does not shout, it records. I asked her to show me once more where to click in case I needed to review later. She repeated the path as if teaching a child. The camera followed every move. The recorder caught the calm music of her voice shaping a lie into a lesson. When she stood to leave, she touched my shoulder and said, "You do not have to worry. I am here." I walked her to the door and watched the car pull away. The house exhaled. In the study, I closed the laptop and took down the frame with careful hands. I pressed the small button Harold had shown me, and the recorder light blinked once. The camera chip slid into my palm, warm from the shelf bulb. I held both for a long second before placing them in a dish on the desk. My eyes fell to the printed draft. It lay where she had left it, a prop that had done its work without a word. I sat, opened the Justice Journal, and wrote the day's entry in clean lines. July 1st. Invited Clara to reconcile accounts. She logged in without prompting. Downloaded tax draft. Transferred $2,500 to account, labeled with my surname, but not owned by me. Memo read tax hold. Phone alert confirmed receipt. I underlined the last sentence once. I added a final note. She taught me the path as if to train me to accept it. At dusk, Harold returned. We said little. He held out an evidence sleeve and I dropped the camera chip and the recorder inside. He sealed it and marked the label with date, time, location, and initials. "We are not the loud kind," he said, the faintest hint of fondness in his voice. "We are the ledger kind." He placed the sleeve into his bag and I gave him a beige envelope addressed in my careful script. Inside was a printed summary of the transaction with the note I had written in the margin. He tucked it next to the evidence and nodded once in that old office way that meant we are aligned. After he left, I stood in the doorway of the study and let the quiet remind me who I was. Not a victim, not a fury, an accountant with a record. The moon rose pale over the lawn. The lavender held its color even in the dim. I closed the door and felt the soft catch of the latch, like a period at the end of a sentence we had waited months to write. The 3rd of July arrived with a clear sky and a quiet heat that settled over the house like a held breath. I set the table early, the good plates and the linen napkins my husband and I had used on holidays when we wanted the ordinary to feel like a ceremony. A roast rested on the counter under foil. Cornbread cooled beside a bowl of green beans with slivers of onion. The living room was tidy and bright, the blinds angled to soften the sun. On the low console beneath the television waited the small drive Harold had returned to me that morning after he made a secure copy its label written in my tidy hand, Evidence. At 5:30, Reverend Cole arrived first with a small pie and a gentle smile. He set it on the counter and squeezed my hand the way people do when they want to lend you steadiness. Harold came 10 minutes later with a neutral face and a careful nod that told me everything was in place. At 6, the door opened and Andrew stepped in with flowers. His voice, warm eyes tired from a week that had asked too much of him. Clara followed in a pale dress with pearl studs. Her smile composed her gaze bright, as if she expected praise to gather around her like moths to a porch light. We ate as if nothing had changed. The conversation floated from weather to work to the fireworks tomorrow. Reverend Cole spoke about a food drive at the church. Harold asked Andrew a simple question about a client and listened with the patience of old accountants who have learned not to rush facts. Clara laughed in the right places and offered to pour more iced tea. The roast was tender. The cornbread broke clean along the cuts. I watched the clock move toward 7 as though time had lanes, and I was merging without a sound. When the last plates were set aside, I wiped the table and said in the even voice I used at the bank, "Let us watch a short family video." Andrew smiled. "Which one, Mom?" "The summer with the lake." Clara folded her hands, curious and ready to be admired. I picked up the remote and the television woke in a soft glow. The first image filled the screen. The study, my desk, the chair where Clara liked to sit. The camera did not need to be clever. It only needed to be steady. The room fell quiet except for the audio that came from the small speakers with the intimacy of a person standing behind you and speaking toward your shoulder. There I was, off to the side, pouring tea. There was Clara opening my laptop as if it belonged to her hands. Her voice came clear and honey smooth. "Let me take care of it." We watched her cursor move with calm certainty through saved bookmarks and into the bank tab and then to the transfer panel. We watched her type 2,500. We watched her select an account whose nickname borrowed my name to disguise its true owner. We watched her write a memo that read tax hold and click confirm. The alert on her phone chimed in the room and again through the speakers, a thin echo that made the act feel colder. The video ended without flourish. No music, no zoom, just the sound of teacups and the small breath of a woman who thought she was invisible. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Harold kept his eyes on the screen like a witness standing with his hand on a book. Reverend Cole bowed his head for a moment as if measuring a prayer. I heard Andrew inhale a sound that scraped the back of his throat. He turned to his wife with a face I had not seen since he broke his arm as a boy and tried not to cry. "Clara, that is my mother's retirement fund." His voice climbed and cracked and filled the room that had once held his birthday parties and piano recitals. And the Christmas morning he opened the bicycle he had begged for all autumn. He stood so fast his chair scuffed the floor. Clara reached for him with a tremor that did not know where to land. "No," she said softly, then louder, as if volume could change the shape of the image we had all seen. It was a mistake. I was moving it to keep it safe. Andrew pointed at the frozen frame on the screen where the confirm button still glowed under her fingertip. Safe from who he said. From my mother. From the person whose name you used to pretend the money was yours to move. His hand shook. He stared at the television and then at her, and something in his face closed like a door. Clara tried to smile and could not find the muscles. She looked at me and attempted a lighter tone. "Mom, you asked me to help. You said you could not remember. I kept my voice even the way you speak when order matters more than volume. Old age has its perks, Clara. Memory is one of them." Her mouth opened and closed. The room held still the way a courtroom holds still when the exhibit is logged and the clerk has taken a step back. Harold spoke for the first time, not unkind, not triumphant. The transfer aligns with a series of withdrawals on the 15th of 6 consecutive months. The memo language is consistent with a pattern often used to mask personal use. He looked at Andrew with the respect one man gives another when he is about to deliver bad news. There is also a tax refund in the amount of $2,700 routed to an account not owned by your mother, though it uses her name in the label. Reverend Cole placed his palms on the table. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Truth does not arrive late. It arrives when it can be looked at without blinking. Clara shook her head too quickly. I did not mean to hurt anyone. I was helping the family. I was keeping things from getting lost. Tears gathered but did not fall. They hung there like an argument waiting for a place to land. Andrew's shoulders dropped. He looked at me with a grief so honest I wanted to put my hand on his cheek the way I used to when he ran a fever. I kept my hands on the table. He turned back to his wife. "You told our church she was forgetful. You let people praise you for spending her money." He swallowed as if the words were heavier than breath. "You spent the part of my mother's life she saved for quiet." The house hummed with the air conditioner and the slow tick of the wall clock. Outside, a lawnmower started down the block, then quieted again as if the neighborhood had decided to listen. Clara reached for Andrew's arm. He stepped back. She looked at me, then at the screen, as though the image might offer her a better story than the one recorded. I pressed pause, and the room returned to stillness. In the silence, I felt the weight of months lift, not in triumph, but in relief. This was not a spectacle. It was a correction. It was the moment a balance sheet aligns, and the numbers stop lying. If you were me, would you expose her in public? Would you forgive family after a theft this big? The questions rose and settled in the room like dust in light. I turned to the counter and lifted the beige envelope I had prepared. Inside were copies of the statements, the screenshots, the transcript summary, and a timeline with dates and amounts in my clean accountant hand. I placed it in front of Andrew. He did not touch it. He did not need to. The truth was already sitting at the table. Clara put both hands on the back of her chair and gripped it as if the wood could hold her upright. "I thought I could put it back," she said in a whisper. "I thought I could fix it before anyone noticed. I thought Mom would not care." The last sentence left her mouth and fell to the floor with a sound no one could hear. I stood and collected the plates with slow movements that felt like closing a file. No one helped me. No one spoke. When I returned from the sink, I turned off the television and the screen went black. The room reflected in its surface like a photograph of people learning something they did not want to know. We stood in that reflection a long moment. Then the evening moved forward because evenings must. The morning of the hearing began with a light rain that washed the dust from the streets of downtown Austin. The courthouse stood quiet under the gray sky, the kind of stillness that felt rehearsed. I arrived early, escorted by Harold, who carried the evidence binder in his steady hands. Inside, everything smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant of nerves, held behind polished doors. The clerk led us to a small courtroom on the second-floor Travis County Civil Division, where cases like ours did not make headlines, but settled truths all the same. The benches were half-filled with strangers waiting for their own turns before the law. At the front sat Judge Ramirez, mid-50s, silver hair, pulled-back eyes sharp, but not unkind. Her robe looked heavy, her posture exact. Justice. I thought wears weight well. Harold placed the binder on the evidence table, each tab labeled, each page numbered. The video had been transferred to a secure drive. The transcripts of transactions lay beneath it, the printed ledger of my months of patience. Clara sat 2 rows ahead with her attorney, a young man whose suit fit too perfectly for his years. Her hands twisted in her lap. The pearls she had worn at the dinner were gone. Andrew sat behind her shoulders, stiff eyes forward, a man torn between family and fact. When the bailiff called our case, the room shifted to attention. The title echoed against the paneled walls: Travis County versus Clara Bennett Pratt, violation of statute regarding elder financial exploitation. The words landed clean. I sat in the first row, close enough to hear the shuffle of papers and the faint tremor in Clara's breath. The judge looked over the file and spoke without preamble. "Mrs. Pratt, you stand accused of unauthorized financial activity involving your mother-in-law's accounts totaling over $32,000, including misappropriation of tax refunds. How do you plead?" Clara's voice came small. "Not guilty, Your Honor. I was just helping." The judge looked up. "Helping yourself, Mrs. Pratt's funds." A quiet ripple moved through the courtroom. The prosecutor, a woman in her 40s with a calm voice, began laying out the timeline. She called Harold first. He walked to the stand with his familiar precision and swore the oath. He described how the investigation began, how he had confirmed the forged power of attorney, how the transfers matched the dates of Andrew's absences, and how the refund had landed in an account not belonging to me. He spoke without emotion, each fact its own weight. The prosecutor then played the video. The screen on the wall glowed faintly, showing Clara seated at my desk, her hands poised over my laptop. Her voice filled the room. "Let me take care of it." The transfer details followed the chime of her phone, echoing softly. When it ended, the silence was almost reverent. Clara's attorney Rose objected to the recording, argued invasion of privacy, misunderstanding, mislabeling. The judge listened unmoved. The evidence was obtained within the defendant's full knowledge of being in the complainant's home, she ruled, overruled. The lawyer tried again, but his words stumbled against the solidity of numbers. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the stand without looking at Clara. The prosecutor asked simple questions: my name, my age, my profession before retirement, my relationship to the defendant. I answered each with precision. Then she asked, "When did you realize funds were missing?" I told her about the bank texts, about the pattern, about the day I decided to act. "Did you ever give the defendant permission to move or manage your finances?" "No," I said, steady. "I asked for company, not control." I spoke of the humiliation of the comments at the grocery store, of the broadcast at the church, of being labeled forgetful by the person who was emptying my savings. I did not cry. Numbers do not cry. They simply line up until they prove what they have to. When I stepped down, the judge thanked me in that formal tone that belongs to procedure, not sympathy. The defense called Clara next. Her hands trembled as she took the oath. She said she was only helping, that I had trouble remembering passwords, that she meant to pay it back, that she did not understand the withdrawals would be considered theft. The judge listened without expression. The prosecutor asked, "Did you also file a tax return in her name and redirect the refund?" Clara hesitated, looked at her lawyer, then nodded once. "I did not think it was wrong," she said softly. "I thought I was keeping things organized." The judge leaned forward. "You used her identity and personal information for your benefit. That is not organization. That is exploitation." Clara's eyes filled, but she said nothing. The judge continued, "Age does not equal ignorance, and kindness does not equal consent." Andrew shifted on the bench behind her, his face pale, his jaw set. When the judge asked if he wished to speak, he stood and said quietly, "No, Your Honor. The truth has spoken enough." He turned slightly, not toward me, but away from the woman he once defended at every dinner table. The judge took a long moment before delivering her decision. The evidence presented meets the threshold for conviction. The court sentences you to 12 months probation restitution of the full amount with interest and mandatory financial ethics counseling. The record will reflect the finding of guilt under the statute of elder exploitation. The gavel struck once the sound clean and final. Clara bowed her head, shoulders shaking once before stilling. Her lawyer murmured something about appeals. No one answered. Harold closed the binder and placed his hand over it as if sealing it shut. I sat without moving, watching the people around me gather their things, the rhythm of closure unfolding. The judge looked toward me and said quietly, "Mrs. Pratt, your diligence preserved more than your savings. It preserved truth." I nodded once, unable to trust my voice. The bailiff guided Clara toward the door where a deputy waited with paperwork. She did not look back. Outside, the rain had stopped leaving the streets gleaming like polished glass. Andrew caught up with me on the courthouse steps, his voice low. I do not know what to say. I looked at him and said, "Then say nothing. Just live honestly." We walked in silence until he turned toward the parking lot and I toward the bus stop. The city felt different, cleaner, as if the air itself had recalculated. Do you believe families should face law equally? Some say forgiveness heals. But what about justice? The questions lingered as I waited under the awning. My umbrella folded the first clear light of the afternoon, breaking through the clouds, like the balance restored in a long, unsettled account. 3 months passed, like a slow ledger, closing each day, checked off with a neat line in the margin. The heat of Austin fell into a late storm that evening, the kind that drums steady on the roof and turns the street into a ribbon of glass. I was sorting letters at the kitchen table when a soft knock came at the door, not urgent, not timid, just the rhythm of someone who wanted to borrow a past that no longer existed. I stepped to the front hall and switched on the porch light. Rain silvered the night, and in its wash stood Clara, hair plastered to her temples, a bouquet of white lilies clutched against her chest. She looked smaller without the pearls, and the perfume smaller without the bright theater of praise around her. "Please, Eleanor," she said, "I lost my job." Andrew left. I opened the door only as wide as the chain allowed and met her eyes in the cone of light. "You did not lose everything I said. You just returned what was not yours." She flinched as if the words had weight. The lilies trembled in her hands. "I'm trying to fix it," she said quickly. "I am seeing a counselor. I am in the ethics class the court ordered. I have been applying for work, but no one wants to hire someone with a mark like mine." Her voice thinned. I did not know it would follow me everywhere. I kept my hands on the door. "Consequences prefer to keep pace," I said. "That is how they teach." I could see in the slick reflection of the porch the ghost of another night, when she had smiled and told me old age had its perks, when she had believed courtesy could hide a hand in my pocket. She looked past my shoulder toward the warm square of my living room and the lamp that always made the house look safe. "I am not asking to come in," she said, though her eyes asked. "I only wanted to say I'm sorry. I did not understand the harm. I was trying to hold our life together. We were drowning in bills, and I thought, if I moved it fast enough and put it back later, no one would be hurt. It was a foolish story, but I held on to it. I thought you would forgive me." "Forgiveness and access are not the same," I said. She hugged the lilies closer, the ribbon darkening with rain. "Please, Eleanor, the apartment I am in is month to month. I have 2 interviews next week, but if those fall through, I do not know where I will go. Could I stay here a few nights?" The words seemed to surprise even her as they left her mouth. The audacity was not loud now. It was tired. It reached for the easiest hand in the room. "Would you open your door again?" The question rose inside the hush of rain as clean as a bell. I looked at her and saw the echo of every woman who had ever mistaken kindness for permission. "Mercy without boundaries is not mercy," I said. "It is an invitation to repeat the harm." She swallowed. "I deserve that," she whispered. The rain beaded on her lashes. "I wish I had not come." No, I said it is good that you came. It is good to look where the damage began. But you may not cross this threshold tonight. I will not rewrite the lesson with a soft ending." She stared at the lilies as if they might tell her what to say. "Do you ever feel pity?" she asked. I wanted to. I wanted to be the person who could wave a hand and make the rain second-guess itself. But pity is not the same as trust, and trust is not a switch you can flick with tears. "I feel many things," I said. "I feel the quiet after a long noise. I feel the balance that finally settled. I feel the ache of watching my son carry a weight he never should have carried. What I do not feel is a reason to reopen a door that justice asked me to close." She nodded, and for a moment the old performance flickered the reflexive smile that had soothed so many rooms. It died as quickly as it came. "I wanted to give you these," she said, lifting the lilies a little. "They are clean. They are not an apology. They are just flowers." I waited. She lowered them slowly, or maybe they are a way to put my hands somewhere while I lie to myself. She drew a breath and met my eyes. Is mercy weakness or wisdom? I let the rain answer for a heartbeat. "Mercy is honest when it stays in its lane," I said. "Tonight mercy looks like a list of shelters and a contact at a community office who places people in temporary work. I have them on paper. I will hand them to you. I will not hold the umbrella over your head longer than that." I unlatched the chain, opened the door wider, and placed a sealed envelope on the step between us. She stared at it as if it might burn. The lilies tilted in her arms. "You are relentless," she said, but it sounded like respect. "You were relentless when you took what you wanted," I answered. "Now the correction must be just as steady." She took the envelope and slipped it inside her coat. I heard the paper whisper against the fabric. The rain softened for a moment, and I could hear the wind in the cedar, like a low voice that had always been there waiting for us to stop talking. "Tell Andrew I am sorry," she said. I did not answer. "That is for you to carry to him yourself." She nodded, and for the first time that night she stood straight as if some part of her had accepted the weight. "I loved him," she said, simple and bare. "Love does not consent to theft," I said. She pressed her lips together. "I know." The streetlight caught the shimmer on her cheek, and she raised her hand as if surprised to find tears. "I did not think I could run out of easy sentences," she said. "But here we are." "Here we are," I said. She took a half step back, and the rain reclaimed the space where she had stood. "Thank you for answering the door," she added, and despite everything I understood the truth in that. Answering matters. Witness matters. The lilies trembled again as a gust came down the block. She hugged them close and turned. I watched her heels find the slick steps one by one. The camera of my memory followed the wet shine of those shoes the way it had once followed them across my clean, brick path. The echo reversed past and present meeting in a narrow slice of porch light. She reached the sidewalk and paused, shoulders hunched against the weather. Then she walked into the rain, not hurried, not dramatic, only a figure learning the shape of the consequence she had made. I closed the door gently and locked it, then stood with my hand on the knob until my pulse found its old, even rhythm. The house was quiet except for the storm and the soft tick of the clock on the wall. I set the untouched lilies in the sink and let the water run over their stems until the mud cleared. Then I left them there, not as decoration, not as forgiveness, only as a record of a night when audacity came back expecting amnesty and found a boundary instead. In the Justice Journal, I wrote one line. She returned, asked for shelter, received a map. I put down the pen and let the rain speak for the rest. The first cool wind of October moved through Austin like a sigh of relief, brushing the city with the promise of gentler days. I stood outside the modest brick building on Riverside Drive that now bore a new brass plaque, Grace Hands Foundation. The name gleamed softly in the afternoon light. Beneath it was a simple logo, a pair of open hands lifting an envelope. I had designed it myself on a sleepless night, sketching until the lines felt like forgiveness without forgetting. Inside, volunteers bustled quietly, arranging chairs for our first workshop. We were small but real, built from restitution and resolve. The mission was simple: to help older women reclaim their dignity after financial exploitation by family members, to teach them to read statements, protect passwords, and document the truth before anyone could rewrite it for them. The first donations had come from women I had never met. Some had read the newspaper story about the court case. Others had watched the local broadcast that covered the verdict. They wrote me letters filled with the same words, repeated again and again. I thought I was alone. I had written back to each one longhand, the way I used to balance ledgers, one careful line at a time. On the wall behind my desk hung a framed photo from the launch event 2 weeks earlier. Reverend Cole stood beside me, one hand on my shoulder, both of us laughing at something Harold had muttered about accountants making the best detectives. The ribbon lay at our feet, cleanly cut. Now, as I walked through the small office, the scent of lavender from the nearby vase reminded me of home. A camera crew from Austin Local News had set up by the door. A young reporter in a navy blazer adjusted her microphone and smiled at me. "Mrs. Pratt," she began, "could you tell our viewers why you started Grace Hands?" I folded my hands on the table, aware of the small tremor age had begun to give me, a tremor I had learned to accept as punctuation. "Because silence is expensive," I said, "and many women my age have paid too much for it." The camera light blinked red. "This foundation isn't about revenge," I continued. "It's about literacy. Not just reading, but reading between the lines. Understanding what respect looks like on paper." The reporter nodded. "How did you find the strength to turn what happened into something bigger?" I smiled, though the memory behind the question still ached. "By doing what I've always done," I said, "balancing the numbers." She tilted her head, curious. "You mean metaphorically?" "No," I said softly. "I mean exactly. I counted what was lost, what was learned, and what could still be built." She smiled again, then signaled to her cameraman to pan across the room. The lens caught the women seated near the back, 4 of them all in their 60s or 70s, notebooks open, listening to a volunteer explain online safety. One wore a pink cardigan and nodded with quiet pride each time she understood a new term. Another whispered to her neighbor, comparing stories, both shaking their heads in disbelief that their children had used the same excuses. The room hummed with soft resilience. After the interview, Reverend Cole stepped beside me. His white collar caught the light as he looked around the space. "You've built something steady here," he said. "Justice doesn't end at court. It begins in courage." His words settled deep. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Harold entered a few minutes later, holding a stack of printed brochures. He had refused any title, but insisted on volunteering his bookkeeping skills. "The numbers look good," he said, placing the folder on my desk. "We'll be able to fund the first legal aid clinic by December." I nodded. "And after that," he smiled faintly. "After that, we help them help themselves. We shared the silence of people who understand that repair isn't quick, but it is measurable." As the evening light faded, the reporter approached again, camera now off. "May I ask something personal?" she said quietly. "Do you ever regret not forgiving her?" I thought about Clara, the rain on her hair, the lilies in her hands, the way her voice had broken when she asked for shelter. I thought about the boundary between mercy and memory. "I forgave her," I said finally. "I just didn't give her the keys." The reporter looked at me for a long moment, then smiled as if she understood. When they left, I turned off the main lights and sat alone with the soft glow from the desk lamp. Outside traffic whispered along Riverside, the hum blending with the night insects. I opened the Justice Journal, now half filled, and wrote the day's entry. October 10th, Grace Hands Foundation operational, 5 women enrolled, first workshop complete. No tears, only clarity. I underlined clarity once and closed the book. Have you ever seen karma move this quietly? I thought of the court, the rain, the porch, the envelope on the step, and how every act had led here to this calm room where justice breathed softly through the walls. If you could build one thing after pain, what would it be? I knew my answer. It would look like this: modest, steady, useful. I glanced around the room one last time before locking up. The air smelled faintly of paper and lavender, like the mingling of truth and tenderness. Outside, the streetlight caught the brass plaque and made the hands on the logo glow. 2 open palms lifting an envelope, not heavy, just honest. I stood there for a moment, the night warm against my skin, and whispered, "For every woman who was told she imagined it." Then I walked to the curb where Harold waited in his car and watched the building fade behind us in the rearview mirror, small but bright, like the first decimal that makes a sum finally balance. A year had passed since the courthouse, since the rain, since the lilies that had wilted and been thrown away. Austin had turned soft again, its summers cooled by rain that came without warning and left the air smelling of cedar and soil. That morning, the drizzle came quiet and slow, brushing against the porch screens, like the ticking of a clock that no longer measured urgency. I sat beneath the awning with a cup of lavender tea, warming my hands, steam rising in lazy curls that blurred the edge of the garden. The lavender bushes had grown taller this year, spilling over the walkway in a riot of silver green. The foundation's paperwork sat neatly in a folder beside me, approved, funded, expanding. Grace Hand's now had 3 chapters across Texas, each one helping women who once thought no one would listen. I could still hear the echoes of their voices from last week's meeting, the laughter that comes when fear has finally been named. The ledger of my life, it seemed, was finding balance again. The gate creaked open and Andrew's car pulled up the drive. He stepped out with a careful smile, older now, his eyes carrying the fatigue of a man rebuilding, but also a steadiness I had not seen in years. "Morning, Mom," he said, climbing the porch steps with an envelope in his hand. "I brought something for you." I gestured to the empty chair beside me. You always did know when the kettle was on. He wiped a few raindrops from his jacket, and placed the envelope on the table. Inside was a new notebook bound in soft leather the color of late coffee. A thin gold line ran along its edge. "For your next ledger," he said. I smiled, running my hand over the cover. The pages inside were blank, pure, untouched by ink or error. "I'm done counting money, son," I said. "Now I count peace." He looked at me for a long moment, eyes shining in the soft light. "You earned it?" he said. The wind stirred the chimes, their notes low and even. The rhythm of the rain deepened, filling the pauses between us. "How are you and Clara?" I asked quietly, not as an accusation, but as a closing of a line left open. He exhaled through his nose, gaze drifting toward the street. "She moved to Dallas," he said, "working part-time at a nonprofit, something with community outreach. I haven't spoken to her much." I nodded. People change when the mirror refuses to lie. "She asked about you," once he added. "Wanted to know if you were happy." I sipped my tea, let the taste settle. "Happiness isn't the goal," I said. "Honesty is. Happiness follows when truth stops running." He smiled, small but real. "You always make it sound simple." "It is," I said. "It just isn't easy." We sat in silence for a while, watching the rain streak across the porch railings. The world smelled clean. Across the yard, a dove landed on the fence, puffed against the chill, and stayed there as if waiting for us to notice it. Andrew reached into his coat and handed me a folded newspaper. The headline read, "Grace Hands expands statewide. Local initiative helps seniors reclaim financial freedom." There was a photo of me standing with a group of volunteers, the logo visible behind us. "You're becoming famous," he teased. I laughed softly. "Fame fades. Ledgers last." He chuckled. "Still the accountant." "Always," I said. "But now I balance different kinds of books." He leaned back, eyes tracing the horizon. "You know, when all this started, I thought you were just trying to get even. I admitted. Then I realized even wasn't enough. The numbers didn't need to match. They needed to mean something. The rain lightened to a mist, turning the garden into a watercolor of color and haze. I felt the air shift, that particular stillness that comes when the day begins to heal itself. I opened the new ledger and turned to the first page. For a long moment, I simply looked at the blankness. Then I picked up my pen and wrote not an entry, but a truth I had learned too late and still on time. Old age has its perks. Clarity. I closed the book and placed it beside the cup, the ink still wet enough to gleam in the gray light. Andrew watched me write and smiled. "You're going to fill that one too," he said. "Not this time," I replied. "This one stays unfinished. Some stories don't need columns." He nodded, understanding more than I had said. The clock inside chimed once, a soft reminder that time too was a ledger, only one. You could never audit. I looked out at the lavender and thought of every chapter before this one. The theft, the shame, the courtroom, the rain. Each had been a transaction of spirit. Pain had been the expense, truth the deposit, and peace the final balance. Mom Andrews said after a while, "Do you ever miss how things were before all of it?" I shook my head gently. I miss who I was before I learned what people are capable of, but I wouldn't trade the knowing. Ignorance is a poor investment. He nodded again, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. The sound of distant thunder rolled softly across the sky, not angry, just steady. He stood kissed the top of my head and said he would come by tomorrow to fix the gate latch. I watched him walk to the car, his shoulders straight, his pace sure. As he drove away, the reflection of his taillights shimmered in the puddles, 2 red coins fading into the fog. I sat for a while longer, listening to the quiet return. The garden hummed with rain. The lavender swayed like small hands waving to no one in particular. I lifted my tea and drank the last warm sip. It tasted of endings and ease. Then I opened the notebook once more and beneath the last line wrote a single date, just to mark that clarity had arrived. Outside, the light softened to gold, the kind that makes even the simplest things look forgiven. The ledger had closed. The story had balanced. Would you have stayed silent or fought for your truth? Tell me below and subscribe for more real stories of justice.